Welcome to the Gynn Method MBE prep course for your iPhone for the multi-state bar exam. It's the federal part of your bar exam. I'm John Gynn. I do a lot of training and tutorial for MBE-based subjects in particular, and what this course is primarily designed for are those repeat takers. Now, what I usually see with repeat takers is their self-confidence is shaken, they're scared, they don't know what they did to not pass the exam the last time, and I'll tell you this much. Essay exams, you're going to get some people grading an essay that are going to grade it well and some people who aren't. There's a little bit of subjectivity in it. MBE, there is no subjectivity in it. So if you want to pass your bar exam, focus on the MBE. Get that score up. And the only way to get that score up is to get your self-confidence up, use the material as part of my workshop, and then go answer questions. So what I do is I take those MBE subjects and I get them into the important pieces that you need to know and remember, and I walk through per subject the different parts and pieces that you'll see on a test. So I explain in my workshop, in my iPhone application, I explain those questions that are dizzying that you see on the MBE, and I tell you how to work with them, and then go answer questions, sample questions, so that when you see it on the test, you'll be able to deal with it. The key for the MBE is practice questions. Now, you've seen in other iPhone applications, and I decided not to do that with this series, where you're answering questions on the iPhone itself electronically. I say always simulate exam conditions. You want to have your answer sheet and your book of questions in front of you. You want to be in a quiet place, perhaps the library or a private study at home, and you want to sit down and answer your questions as they come to you and simulate exam conditions, and you're not going to be answering questions on the iPhone for the MBE. Okay, part of the Gynn Method MBE process are some plumbing and tools, and I want to go over those, how I use those, the requirements when you're doing MBE questions. I'll give you the stuff from my MBE iPhone application, and I will shove it back into your brain as it's supposed to be there to get you to the questions. But you have to have the tools. And what I absolutely insist upon for all the people I tutor is this: a stack of screw-up lists, notepads. And you have one notepad for each MBE subject. And what they are for is that when you miss a question or you get it right for the wrong reason, you make a note as to the answer and maybe other things that will jot your memory pertaining to that question. In my sessions, what you'll see in your iPhone application at the bottom of each subject is I read through my screw-up lists, the list that I created when I was taking the bar exam, because I figure more facts at you, just keep firing facts at you, they will stick in your brain, and between the stuff I give you and the stuff you pick up on your own, you will really have those subjects nailed down for the MBE. Second thing you absolutely need to have are note cards. You need to have stacks and stacks of these. So when you do not remember something, don't worry, write it down. And lastly, what I insist upon is a slow, progressive method of questions. Do not think you can do 100 questions in a day, because you can't. It is impossible to do 100 quality questions in a day. I recommend 30 thorough questions. Do it subject specific until about 6 weeks before the test, maybe a month before the test, and then start mixing it up and doing hard questions. And you'll find a bunch of questions online that you can download. You'll find questions from other bar exam courses and books, whether it's PMBR, whether it's Barbary. Anybody has got a stack of questions, and work through them. Those are your tools. Memorizing is important, but you absolutely positively have to remember specific stuff that the MBE is going to ask you on. Let me show you some of the stuff that's in my iPhone application. So as you see, you can take an individual and you can have all these different potential causes of action that that person can either be liable for or that person can sue for. We'll get into products liability next, and we'll also get into products liability. And you'll see that you can sue for a product liability case in battery, you can sue strict liability, you can sue in products liability, you can sue in negligence, you can sue in all these different theories. So don't sit there and say, there's a wild animal, they're strictly liable for it. Because if it's a domestic pet but it's a pit bull, maybe they're not strictly liable for it, but they have a duty. Maybe they have a negligence duty as an owner-occupier of land that's an elevated duty, and you are an invitee and you're injured by this animal. It's not a wild animal strict liability theory. It's a negligence claim with an elevated duty, breach, cause, damages, absent defenses. So really get that thinking cap on with all of these different parts and pieces as you walk into a civil case and start saying, what are they talking about, what are they excluding, and they just really whittle it down, and the answer tends to pop out at you. But you just want to get really fluent at working with these different sections. Next, we're going to talk briefly about leases. All right? A lease, you've got two things going on. We talked about earlier on definitions: privity of contract, which is contract law, and then privity of estate, which is a conveyance law. So if you've got a present landlord and present tenant, and they signed a contract, both privities apply. They are bound by the contract, and they are bound by the fact that the landlord conveyed a use of the property to the tenant. So you can apply both of those to what we're about ready to talk about. There are two things that you can do with a lease. You have a lease, you sign a lease, you're bound by it by contract law. They're not going to test you on that. There's an assignment of a lease, or there is a sublease. An assignment is a complete transferal of that lease from one party to the next. A sublease is to sublet part of a piece of property or part of your interest in a piece of property to somebody else. I want to sublet my apartment for 2 months while I'm gone for the summer. That's not transferring your entitled interest. That's not transferring your entire interest in the lease. It's only transferring a portion of your interest. We'll start with assignments of a lease, of a transferal. Landlord can sue on contract theory if there is an issue with the original signer of the lease and the landlord, the person who has signed the lease. The landlord can sue him because he has a contractual relationship with him. And he can also sue the person who has now taken the assignment of the lease because they have a privity of estate between the two. That's a present party privity. So then, once the assignment has taken place, the landlord only has privity of contract with the original person who signed it, not with the new tenant. And only has a privity of estate with the new tenant, not with the original signing party. It's important to know that segregation of those two things. So the tenant has given the assignment of the lease, the complete remainder of the lease, to somebody else. We know who the landlord can go after if he has an issue and why. Sublease. Sublease is if you're transferring less than your original interest in a piece of property. In order for a tenant to be liable under a sublease, you've got the two original parties, the landlord and the tenant. The tenant subleases to somebody here. The person they subleases to is liable to the landlord via privity of estate, and same as an assignment. The landlord's the original contract, the tenant who contracted is liable via privity of contract. Where they get you on the MBE is this: Party A, who is the original tenant in the lease, subleases it to Party B. Party B then subleases it to Party C. And they ask you, can the landlord go after Party B? You ask yourself, is there privity of contract? No. The landlord and Party B did not sign a contract. And you ask yourself, is there privity of estate? Does the landlord have any kind of current conveyance interest with Party B? The answer is no. So the answer to the question when they do that, when they do hop, hop, hop in a sublease, is he cannot sue Party B. So Party A gives to Party B a sublease. I let my apartment to you for 3 months in the summer. Party B stays in it for a month and then subleases it to somebody else for the remainder 2 months. Party B is off the hook. One of the things you have to know about subleases is this: a restriction on alienability of the tenant not to be able to sublease it is valid. You can have a restriction on alienability in a sublease so that the tenant does not sublease it. However, if the landlord approves it once and says, go ahead and sublease it to your friend for a month, the phrase in the contract is now null and void for the remaining length of the contract. If he subleases it to his friend for a month and then he returns, and then 2 months later he sublets it to somebody else, the contract's phrase for restriction on subletting a piece of property does not apply. So, for ownership interest in land, we did the whole thing. Present interest, future interest, we did co-owners and tenancy, and we did landlord-tenant and who has rights and regulations underneath that.